My name is and I'm your host tonight. It is always so nice to gather with so many freedom-loving people. We seem to do that a lot more a few years ago, and now of course we can do it whenever we want to, and maybe we do it a little bit less. But thank you all for coming out tonight. I consider you all my freedom-loving friends, and I just love to see you any opportunity we get. So the last 5 years have been a little bit crazy, but it didn't end, as we all know. And that's why we are here tonight and meeting with people that we had not this happened, everything in the last 5 years. There's probably a lot of people in here that I never would have met, so I'm happy to call you all my friends. But we've got lots of work to do. I think we all know that. In virtually every realm, but especially in the legal realm, and that's why we're here tonight. You'll all remember the 2023 ruling by Federal Justice Richard Mosley, and he's the one who gave us this enormous win. And he said that the invoking the Emergencies Act during the trucker convoy was in fact unconstitutional. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Both Eddie Cornell and Vincent Vercees, who I will be introducing in just a few minutes, plus I believe there's one or two others here tonight who are named among those plaintiffs. Two over there, welcome. Well, there was 20 people, 20 plaintiffs who filed this lawsuit, not against the government, but against the individuals responsible for the results from invoking the Emergencies Act. And that means that, amongst others, there's Justin Trudeau, Freeland, who was at the time finance minister. She was primarily responsible for freezing bank accounts. Marco Mendocino, who was then Minister of Public Safety, and the government official who actually invoked the Emergencies Act, Steve Bell, the interim Ottawa Chief of Police, and quite a list of others. But I'm not the one who's going to be speaking about this, so I'm going to introduce first Eddie, and then Vincent, and then Bathsheba Vandenberg, their legal counsel. So let me introduce Eddie first. He came all the way from New Brunswick, 17 hours. Timer for 20 minutes, that's a good man.
There we go.
Okay, I have to introduce you first. Okay, so he was with the Canadian Armed Forces for 22 years, served in several places within Canada and Europe, including a tour of duty with the Canadian contingent in Cyprus. And when he was there, he was a recipient of the Medal of Bravery. That's a story for another time. Next time you get an invite. Since leaving the military, Eddie has been an auxiliary police officer with the OPP, and he's worked in the auto industry. In February 2022, Eddie participated in the trucker convoy, which led to the series of events that brings us all here tonight. Following the convoy events in Ottawa, Eddie co-founded Veterans for Freedom, an organization that supports veterans. And members of the public from overreach of the government. Eddie is committed to regaining the rights and freedoms of all Canadians and explains that his job will be done when these rights are restored. So, thank you for coming, Eddie.
Thank you, Giselle. Thank you, everybody. Well, now I'm a full-time curmudgeon, and I'm just kidding. Yeah, I traveled from New Brunswick to see all you folks, and I just want to ask, what's the furthest people in the group here came from tonight? Is there anybody outside of Ontario here? Well, I really appreciate everybody coming out and supporting our effort, listening to what we have to say. And it's a big job, you know, and it's one of those things that all of us have to get involved in. We're losing our country, and it's happening right before our eyes, in our lifetime. And, you know, that's not something to make light of. It's like the cut of 1,000 knives, you know, it's a little bit here, a little bit there. And when you look back, you've lost so much. And, you know, the past 5 years have really been a struggle for, you can hear me okay, right? Yeah. Okay, I thought I'd better ask that. I got my hearing aids on high tonight, so I just want to make sure that I hear myself, and I'd like to know that you hear me too. Yeah, it's, you know, the past 5 years country, our families, and our communities. And some people are oblivious to it. And thankfully, you aren't those people. You've been engaged. You've paid attention. I like to look at it this way. We're a bunch of unicorns in a field of sheep. And it seems that way. It's really true. But you have to believe in unicorns. I do. So, it's, you know, and what you find is that people have become very complacent in their lives. Life seems to be on the, you know, the normal side. Well, that's partly true. But if you look at what's going on in our courts and in our communities, those who poke their head up tend to get pushed down. And it scares the rest of us from putting our head up. And I understand that fear, because when you have the machine of police and government coming against you, it's a scary thing. It can destroy your life in every way you can possibly think of. So, how many people in the room here, oh, I'm sorry, would have been at the convoys? Or, wow, holy smokes, that's terrific. So you know what happened in Ottawa. You were there, you experienced what took place. And, you know, the overreach of our government, trying to portray a narrative that we were Nazis and extremists and domestic terrorists. We're just regular folks that want to live our life and be left alone without the government reaching into our daily life and telling us what to do and making your own choices. And that's why we were all there. That's what it was about. And they wouldn't engage with us. They wouldn't say a word. There was no communication. What did they do? All the king's horses, all the king's men came out and crushed us. And people outside of Ottawa cheered it on. And they cheer it on to this day. It's shameful. It really is. And, you know, I think we all suffer from, I guess, like a post-traumatic stress syndrome, all of us, for what we went through and what we were exposed to. But the one thing we still have is hope. We really do. And we have to inspire other people. And I'm not saying that you have to, you know, be out there and, you know, speak to hundreds of people. Just nudge the people that are close to you and point out things to them. They may come around. Never put their face in it to say, this is the way it is and that's the way, because they won't, their ears and eyes will turn off. But if you say, you know, you could look at, you might want to check this out. Don't believe me, but look at it for yourself. And that, for me, tends to be the way that I can engage people to get more involved in things. And I think it's very effective. So, I think that after the convoy, when they crushed all of us in Ottawa, all the king's horses, all the king's men, and we went forward with the lawsuit, we didn't know what was going to happen. We had no idea. I mean, things weren't looking too good. And then I remember the day I was in my garage out in New Brunswick. I was working on my tractor. I was changing the oil and doing some maintenance on it. And my phone rang. And it was like, we won. I couldn't believe it. Honestly, I was jumping up and down like I won the lottery. And I was by myself in the garage. And I ran in, and my wife, I'm jumping up and down. She's like, what the hell is the matter with you? And I told her we won, and she's jumping up and down. And it was just a whirlwind. All of a sudden, my phone's burning up, and it was crazy. And that went on for a little while, and then people went back to sleep. But in the meantime, we launched our lawsuit with the 20 plaintiffs that we have for freezing our bank accounts. Is there anyone here that had their bank accounts frozen other than people that are in our lawsuit? Is there anyone else that experienced that? I can tell you, and I think there's 256 people, give or take a few, in Canada that had their bank accounts frozen. I was in Ottawa, and I had nothing. It was middle of winter. I had to find my way back to New Brunswick. And believe me, it was not an easy journey home. It was tough. I went to get gas and go back one place. And, you know, everybody's got the mask on. I went to pay, because, you know, at that station you could lift the pump. It wasn't like with a debit card. So I went to pay. Oh, no cash. I'm like, that's all I got. But I'd already filled up. I said, well, you can call the cops. Here's the money. I'm leaving. Anyway, I left. I got my gas. I made it home, thankfully. And the sense of betrayal that you feel when they freeze all of your assets and you don't know if or when they're going to unlock those. It was devastating. And people think, oh, that's no big deal. You know, it was only for a week. It was only for 2 weeks. Everybody had a little bit different experience. But it was devastating. Couldn't pay your bills, couldn't buy food, couldn't buy gas. And you had no means to get, you know, a resolution to that. The only thing I called my bank was, well, you have to call the president. The president? The president of the bank. Well, give me his number. Well, we don't hand that out. Okay, here we go. So thankfully, they finally did get released. But I have no trust for our banks anymore. You know, I keep minimal in there. I kind of stuff my mattress now. I do. You know, I don't want that to happen again. So what happens is when people want to give money to, you know, special things, causes like ourselves and others, they're hesitant because that fear of that government going to come down and freeze your assets. But think of this. If they were to do that to somebody that wants to donate to a cause because they froze their bank accounts, I wouldn't do that. You know, so it would be really dangerous for the government to do something like that. They probably would love to, but I think it's just too much of a risk for them. And I have great hope in this case. And I think the Mosley decision was a landmark case that will be talked about for generations. And Vincent and I were very lucky to be a part of that. It's just one of those things that through a bunch of historical accidents, you end up there. Not because of what we are. It's just, that's how sometimes things work out. And we were lucky enough to be a part of a major decision that affected everything in this country when it had to deal with our Constitution and your Charter of Rights. And thankfully, Justice Mosley made a decision based on law, not on political interference. And at first, it didn't look so good. You know, he did say that he probably would have sided with the government. But once he saw the evidence, thankfully to our legal team, he made the correct decision. But the one thing that kind of gave me hope, and you never know how it's going to go, is when he admitted that in his early life, he was once a trucker. Yeah. So I was like, maybe, yeah, you never know. And then there we were, pretty much a year later, and we got the decision we got. And wow, it was spectacular. Then we had to do this lawsuit. And it's so important because I know we don't represent all of the people that had the bank account. Some people just went about and went on with their lives and don't want to be involved in it. But we can't let them get away with it. We just can't. Because if they bring in digital currencies and all these other things, guess what happens? Oh, you said something they didn't like on Facebook. Well, doink! You know, they shut down your account. You go to buy gas, and it's like, you don't have authority to buy your gas today. Your assets are frozen. Unless you repent. So that's the direction we're going. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to go that way. I don't want to live in a communist dystopian country. I really do. I got a couple minutes left. Wow. You're lucky. No, I'm kidding. You know, in all seriousness, I like to look on the lighter side of things too, because it's so easy to get caught up and think that things are so dark that we have no hope. And I see that all the time in people's eyes. They're defeated, they're deflated, they just, I don't know, they just want to give up. But you can't. You can't give up. I know for myself, she's my stepdaughter, but she cut us off at the beginning of COVID. We haven't seen our grandkids in 5 years. Yeah. So, one day, I hope they say, Grandpa did something.
You will.
I'll never give in, but I could give up. And I look at this like I'm sorry to get choked up, I still do. I look at this like a relay race, and some of us are in this race right now with a baton, and we're just regular folks. But sooner or later, we're going to run out of energy. We won't be able to run anymore. We need somebody to take the baton and carry it as far as they can go. And we need to get to the finish line and correct this. And it takes all of us, across the country. And, you know, with the media, the way that they have the control of the message, we really feel that we're not making headway, that we're not making, gains, but we are. The world sees what's going on here in Canada. I was fortunate enough to be in Washington last April and speak in Washington, and it was really unusual that the Americans really didn't know much about what was happening in Canada. They knew about the trucker convoy, but they didn't know politically what's going on in our country and just how, overbearing our government became. And I did the best I could to anybody who would listen to bring attention to what's going on in Canada down there. And thankfully, some people listen, and we're getting traction in different countries around the world, not just me, but everybody, and they're looking inwards to Canada as, if this nation falls to this dystopian communist takeover, then they're at risk too. We all see it around the world. So that's why lawsuits like we've done are so important. But here's the pitch. It costs a lot of money. It really does. And the government knows this. So what do? They keep it so that, you run out of gas, you run out of money, and then they crush it. We can't let that happen. We just can't. Because if we lose, the country loses. And I'm very proud of this country. I really am. I mean, I stood up as a soldier for our country, and I was very proud to do that. And, as life goes on, you do other occupations. I was an auto worker, and I was proud to do that. I made some of the best cars that, Canada produces. And I was proud of that work. And I want the country to have the jobs and the security so our kids and our grandkids can afford to buy homes, have jobs, pay rent, buy food. But things aren't good right now. And we don't want to be captured by people that just want to take everything we have. So I'm going to wrap up, and I really appreciate everybody coming here tonight and, having the courage to keep going when others have walked away and given up. And you really need to give yourself a big hand, because you are the soldiers that are going to get us where we need to go. So don't ever forget that you're never alone. Look to your left and to your right and behind you. These are the faces that are going to save our country. They really are. It's not us. It's you, all of you, together. Thank you very much, folks. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Eddie. We've got a few more people to join us. That's nice. Okay, next is Vincent. Vincent is a former OPP officer, having served 32 years with the OPP. He's also a former member. Oh, Bathsheba. Oh, sorry. I thought we were changing
I can
the
speak
other way.
if you want.
Okay. No, that was the original order. Okay, let's start again. Bathsheba Van. She is the founder and owner of Agronomy Law and is licensed to practice both in Alberta and Ontario. Yay, we get her here too. She resides in Calgary, although I believe she grew up in Ontario. And before I read the rest of her bio, I have to tell you just a little funny story, because I met Bathsheba in Edmonton 4 or 5 weeks ago at the National Citizens Inquiry. I didn't know she was going to be there because she wasn't one of the speakers, but she just lives in Red Deer, so not too far away. And there was just beautiful sunshine that day, so I went to stand outside and get a little bit of that sunshine on my face. And there was another gentleman standing beside me, one of the other speakers, and she came walking out. My back was facing to the door, and she's walking down the parking lot. And the guy beside me says, "Nice boots." And I look, and she's wearing these pink, sparkly cowboy boots. And I have to admit, I was a little disappointed that she didn't have them when she came here tonight. Well, Bathsheba started her law career in international criminal law at the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. She has lectured at the Hague University teaching international law. She also previously worked as a rule of law advisor for the British Army, advising on the laws of war, human rights, and counter illegal wildlife trade. I bet she's got lots of stories to tell. Countries she has worked for in the human rights realm include Canada, the UK, Kenya, Togo, Kazakhstan, the Netherlands, and Afghanistan. And now she finds herself highly sought after to defend rights and freedoms in her home country. So please help me welcome Bathsheba.
Well, you all have to come out to Alberta if you want to see them boots. Right. First, I just want to say that each one of you is a human rights defender, and I think we need to start recognizing that. As Giselle pointed out, I've been working in human rights overseas for over a decade, and I've worked in countries that were broken, that had failed rule of law systems, and where there were severe human rights breaches being conducted by government and by police force and military. And we've just heard Eddie talk about the impact of having your bank account frozen. And it's really hard to convey what that actually means, how detrimental and devastating that is to our democracy, our rule of law, and human rights. In the countries that I've worked in, they kill people. Those are the types of human rights breaches that occur over there. They're called extrajudicial killing when it involves government, military, or police forces killing innocent civilians. Now, what I've equated the freezing of bank accounts with is extrajudicial financial killing. Because we're moving to a cashless economy, and all of our money, all of our credit, our bills, everything comes out of a central focal point. So when that's taken away, our livelihood is taken away. And that has huge impacts on our psychological well-being. Now, it came to my attention a couple of years ago, and it was in my personal circle of friends where someone said to me, I know of somebody who knows of somebody that was a single mother and was so terrified when that threat came out, that bank accounts would be frozen of people who donated, that this woman took her own life. She had donated money and she left behind a young boy. And I still come across to this day stories of people who are fearful to stand up and be political dissidents, fearful to stand up for their human rights because they're going to have their bank accounts frozen or be debanked. That's what makes each one of us a human rights defender, because we are standing up for the government to respect our human rights. And I use the word human rights and not charter, because in my mind, the charter doesn't protect our human rights. All right, so I'm going to start with this lovely little presentation. I'm not just going to focus on the Emergencies Act case, because there's a couple of other things going on too as well. I mean, we heard about the guilty verdicts yesterday for Chris Barber and Tamara Leach, and that's 2 more guilty verdicts of the public mischief charges for participating in a peaceful protest. So I called this the Rule of Law and Human Rights in Canada presentation. And I'm going to start with the invocation of the Emergencies Act. So I just want to set the scene. Operational plan, that was on February 13th of 2022, a day before the Emergencies Act was invoked. That's just a list of the police services that were involved in this integrated mobilization operational plan. And when we're looking at this, you see that the mission is rather peaceful. The police office to keep the peace, enforce legislation, maintain public safety, even includes a call for the police officers to respect individual charter rights and freedoms. And then we go to the objectives, to facilitate a resolution through de-escalation. So we're looking at a very sort of, peaceful approach to managing the protests in Ottawa. And that's the operational plan in just a day before the Emergencies Act was invoked. Well, things certainly did a 180 after the Emergencies Act was invoked. And we have what we call the tactical plan. These are boots on the ground plan. So these are the police officer forces involved, and we have this detailed plan dated on February 16th of 2022. Now, how this looks different is that the mission is to ensure the removal of protesters in the area of the blockades. So what the police constituted as the blockades, although it's arguable whether it was the people's blockades or the police themselves who were creating the blockades. And then we have the execution, so the concept of operations, of how they're going to carry out this. And I call it the Operation Takedown, because that's essentially what it was. So the idea is that there would be the public order unit teams, the POUs, that would go out and take down each location, and they listed a series of locations. Again, a series of blockades, which again I have a huge question on whether that was the people's blockades or the police blockades, to prevent people from leaving, and then you could just snatch, grab, throw them behind the lines, arrest them, and deport them outside of Ottawa. So that's exactly what happened. So this is what Operation Takedown looks like on the morning of February the 18th. What I like about this video, thanks to Global News, is that it shows a veteran, somebody who fought, like Eddie, for this country's freedoms. And he's seen the scene elsewhere. He's seen, like myself, He's seen this scene elsewhere in other countries that we have fought in to protect our values, and he's seeing that same scene over here. The police force being used against innocent civilians. I mean, it's a very intimidating scene. And I was representing the protesters at the Public Order Emergency Commission, and I presented this photo to Superintendent Bernier, who was the head of the whole POU, Operation Takedown, and I asked him to identify each of the weaponry that the RCMP police were holding here. You know, we got people holding a magazine that can carry 30 rounds, that's military style. You've got weapons that are NATO-grade weapons. We're talking military-looking folk here. It's the RCMP, we have to remember, are paramilitary forces. They can be trained in means that are identical to military. So although the government did call it the military because they were afraid of what that image would look like to the world, we need to tell the world that they did in fact call it the military, they called it the paramilitary. And they were armed to the hilt just as the military are, using the same weaponry. When I asked these questions to Superintendent Bernier, although he pointed out that all the weaponry was the same, and I asked him, do they not look military-like? And he said, no. Now this is a video, and I'm showing this because at the Public Order Emergency Commission, I showed one video, and after that I wasn't allowed to show any other videos. Even when I was doing the examination in chief of the only 2 witnesses we were allowed to call up as protesters, you know, showing the other side of the story. And the Commissioner Rouleau prevented me from showing these other videos. And it was important to show these because these are the protesters' stories that show violence and great breaches of human rights that still remain today unresolved. You know, we're looking at the snatch and grab here of Maggie Braun. Now, you may recall the story of Maggie Braun, a mother, and she was snatched and grabbed there in the center, put behind the lines, and had a rifle pointed to her head. That's not the Canada that I know. That's not the Canada that the international community speaks of. That's why we need to share these stories. Now, this is the video that upset the Commissioner Rouleau because it evoked a lot of emotion. It showed the truth of what happened. If you look closely, there's someone who's snatched and grabbed behind police lines, and then they have the barrel of a munitions launcher smashed into their head several times. Again, this is the kind of draconic behavior and conduct that I've seen outside of Canada in countries that we accuse of committing human rights breaches, but we can't admit, our government cannot admit that they have committed grave human rights breaches against Canadian citizens in 2022. I find it an incredible piece of footage because the song "O Canada," it's like such a sad scene where you have the song of "O Canada" while this person is being smashed in their head with the rifle, you know, the barrel of a rifle. In my mind, I always have to tell myself it's the barrel, not the butt, because we often hear about being smashed in the head with a butt, let alone a barrel that causes huge damage to disfiguration. So then we have Justice Mosley's decision of last year, so where he states that he concludes that there was no national emergency justifying the invocation of the Emergencies Act, and the decision to do so was therefore unreasonable and ultra-virus, and that was a huge victory that is now in the Federal Court of Appeal. Mr. Ector and myself were representing Vincent and Eddie back in February of this year, and we are waiting for the decision, and we're hoping that it will uphold the initial decision. And I'm going to go through a little bit through what Justice Mosley found, but I'm going to talk a bit more about how we should be looking at his decision and these public mischief decisions, because he's saying the Emergencies Act was unreasonable and ultra-virus. It was illegal, okay? So in his decision, he states that the breach of freedom of expression, there was a breach of the freedom of expression to me because the measures were overbroad in their application, and that some people wanted to protest and weren't likely to engage in the breach of the peace. But you'll find out later when we look at some of the case law on the public mischief, it didn't matter if you just stood there, you would still be charged with public mischief and found criminally guilty for exercising your right to freedom of expression. Breach of Section 8 of the Charter by permitting unreasonable search and seizure of financial information of designated persons and the freezing of their bank and credit card accounts. There was, unfortunately, the court did not find the breach of the rights of freedom of peaceful assembly, but that is before the Federal Court of Appeal for cross-appeal by CCLA and CCF. No breach of Section 7 respecting liberty, and no breach of due process or property rights. So that's interesting because the Canadian Bill of Rights was argued, and again the courts sort of said, well, there's no breach, and I find it a little disturbing where Justice Mosley writes, the freezing of Vincent and Eddie's bank accounts was of a short duration. So while no doubt inconvenient, it did not cause them significant harm, and they were both able to manage without quick access to cash or the use of credit cards. Again, I think people don't understand really what it means when you have your bank account frozen. All your access to all the money that you have made is gone. And you can't do anything. You're immobilized. You're going to miss your payments. You're going to have a bad credit score. You're not going to be able to apply for loans. It has serious consequences, let alone serious psychological harm, which has been completely overlooked because that was mentioned in Eddie's and Vincent's affidavits. Now, the economic order, I want to tell you a little story that with the economic order, when I read the economic measures order in 2022, I cried. And it's very unusual for me to read any legal document and feel emotional and cry. I cried because of the powers that this order gave financial institutions and government. And again, I don't think it's something people fully appreciate. I used to work also in the financial industry, and so when I read this, I knew exactly what it meant. So first of all, we have a definition of anybody who's indirectly or directly involved, or looks like they're involved in the protest, whatever that means. So it's a very vague definition in who's going to be targeted here. So this is your target group, it's anybody. And then you have the duty to determine, so entities, all financial institutions, insurance companies, there's a long list here, to determine that you were engaged in the protest. So they would be able just to make some sort of decision based on information on the news, based on misinformation, lies, that you were involved in the protest. And they would share that with the RCMP and CSIS. And then you have the vice versa, where the RCMP and CSIS would share that information with your financial institutions. So you have no more privacy. You know, all of our transactional history, our whole life, it's like worse than digging into somebody's garbage can in terms of finding out what they're doing with their life based on the transactional history. In my mind, when I read this, and it's still an unanswered question, and by the way, there is technology out there that can actually rip all of our data and host it onto a huge database. My question out there still is, did all of our information from all of our banks automatically go to CSIS and RCMP and our cities on some software database somewhere? Because this is what this order allows. Although it was a short-lived order, it could have been done. in that week and a half, where all of our information was stripped and gifted over to intelligence agencies and God knows what other institutions. So I talked about criminal convictions for protesting, and I'm focusing on this case in particular, and I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with the Crown against Rumluski, and his name is David Rumluski, and I'm going to call him David, and I just want to mention that he did pass away recently in some very unusual circumstances, and I would invite everyone to look into this and know a little bit more about his story. I just want to pay respects to him and his family, so I'm not going to talk anymore about his circumstances of death. But I will say that from what I read about him, he was self-representing himself in the public mischief charge. He was a very articulate young man. He was only 27 this year when he passed away. And he won, so he was found not guilty of public mischief charges, and then he appealed it, rather the Crown appealed it, because there was two, so he was charged with obstructing a police officer and then also of public mischief. He was found not guilty of public mischief, but he was found guilty of obstructing a police officer, and he appealed the guilty verdict of the obstructing the peace officer, but the Crown appealed the not guilty of the public mischief. And at the Court of Appeal level, at the Superior Court, so the next level of court, he was found guilty. And I'll show you another slide, but most of the public mischief charges thereafter quoted his case, the loss of the Superior Court. See, right, when you have one case that sets a precedent, and then all the other cases can grab onto it and say, look, guilty there, so guilty here, guilty everywhere, guilty for Chris, guilty for Tamara. But he had actually appealed on March 12th of 2025 to the Supreme Court of Canada. Imagine that, if his case had made it to the Supreme Court of Canada, that means anybody else who's been charged and been found guilty of public mischief would be able to appeal. And if he had won at the Supreme Court of Canada, that would have set a precedent then to find the not guilty and have all the guilty verdict overturned for everyone that's been criminally charged with public mischief for simply peacefully protesting against government overreach. And yet he died a week after. Let that sit in. A really big tragedy, a really big loss. But I invite you to read this case, because it tells us what you can't do anymore at a protest, because you're going to be criminally charged. Although the first instance court found him not guilty of public mischief, they say he wasn't guilty because he wasn't part of the convoy, like he wasn't encouraging anyone to protest, right? So he was just standing there basically on February 19th on Spark Street in front of the public order unit, and he was praying. And that's when he was snatched and grabbed and arrested and then convicted and charged with public mischief and obstructing a peace officer. So it's a very dangerous idea that if you are at a protest, any protest in Canada, and if you tell one person next to you, hey, join this protest with me, you're going to be criminally charged. That's what this says here. And this is a photo of David in front of the police line. It's such a peaceful act, such a beautiful act. He's praying. And then I mentioned that and I think I just want to, there is something that I just want to read. Oh yeah, because paragraph 27, the court's saying, well, you know, people outside Ottawa don't know that there's actually people that live in Ottawa, and in reality, the downtown is a thriving area occupied by countless middle-class and working-class people who at the time were deprived of even the most basic use and enjoyment of their property, the right to a peaceful night's sleep, and the right to move freely in their own neighborhood. Let that sit in. You know, so that is more important than your right to say no to a COVID-19 vaccination that might cause you adverse effects or might kill you. That a right to peaceful sleep is more important to the courts than the right to peaceful protest It just doesn't make sense anymore, does it? And again, here we have the Crown theory who says, well, David, you know, he was a party to the Freedom Convoy occupation. But then the court said no, because he was just a standalone guy. He wasn't a trucker. Okay, you gotta look at this as if, like, what are the qualifying factors for making you potentially a suspect for public mischief charge in the next protest, right? Okay, well, he wasn't a trucker, he didn't bring in a vehicle, he wasn't involved in organizing or contacting the organizers, there's no evidence linking him to the protest or its organization, he didn't provide any material support to the truckers, such as fuel or food, no financial support. So I mean, it's criminal act now to provide food to people. I mean, many people here in this room, including Vince and Eddie, were helping feed the protesters. That's a criminal offense now in Canada. Sorry. Just, I'm aware that I have a limited amount of time and I just don't want to read through absolutely everything, but I do invite you to read this, this case. So here are some of the other cases, all these cases up there, okay? These people have been charged, criminally charged, facing 10 years, right? That's a sentence for public mischief, although that's not what people have actually incurred, but that's a threat. All these cases quoted David's case at the Superior Court level when he lost and was found guilty of public mischief. And the reason why the court at the Superior Court level said that he was guilty of public mischief is because they said, oh, well, he stood there. So that was part of the unity, right? He just stood there. That was enough to find him guilty of public mischief. And we see this, it says, and these are the two paragraphs that are quoted by all these cases. David's presence, actions, and encouragement on February 19th amounted to participation. So you might look at somebody and say, hey buddy, how are you doing? And smile at them. Next thing you know, you're guilty of public mischief. Kindness is a crime now in Canada, don't you know? So moving to the freezing of bank accounts lawsuit, Eddie spoke about that. And we've got 20 plaintiffs who have sued personally former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Christian Freeland and a bunch of financial institutions. So what I really want to do is just kind of run through who these people are, because it's important to share these stories of the ordinary, hardworking Canadians, and that that people were being heavily watched and monitored and surveyed. That kind of stuff happens in Russia. When people say they're anti-Russia here in Canada, like, have a look at this country here. It's not any different, actually. So we have Vince, well, he's going to tell a story, but it says here, he's from Front Hill, and attempted to donation to Give Send Go, but funds were returned. Bank told him that it was not CIBC's or Simply's doing, and that the request to freeze his bank account came from the RCMP. Accounts frozen despite having left protests. And that's important because at the Federal Court of Appeal, they asked the question, well, yeah, when you leave the protest, your banks are unfrozen. Well, wasn't that organized? It was there was no way of having your bank account unfrozen. There was no mechanism in place at all. And I can tell you that because I've seen the records of POI. There was nothing in place. I mean, there was one suggestion of, well, you know, the protester could just go up to an RCMP counter and say, I'm no longer part of the protest. Right. And as we often say, like, the freezing of the accounts really without a court order or any evidence is really a situation where the prosecutor, the judge, and the executioner all in one. And that's an affront to democracy, rule of law, human rights, due process, everything that this country stands for. And if you tell the story to anyone outside of this country, they're shocked that happened here in Canada. Then we have Andrew. He was in Ottawa. He's from Anon. He did some cash donations. National Bank and Meridian Credit Union accounts were frozen. He was assaulted and battered and threatened. Then we have OJ. He was in Ottawa from Brantford. Scotiabank checking and savings accounts, credit card, joint accounts with his wife and children, so they were impacted. His accounts were frozen. Scotia did not help. Contacted by RCMP directly. An affected credit score and family. His bank accounts were frozen for 10 days. He missed bill payments, and he was also assaulted and battered and also tear gassed. Then we have Lindsay was at Ottawa from Oshawa. No donations made. Restaurant manager, TD checking and savings accounts frozen. Called TD and told RCMP that RCMP told TD to freeze the accounts. No money to get home to Oshawa. So mother provided cash to help her, and Lindsay witnessed people being trampled by the police horses. Then there's Clayton, also in Ottawa from Dorchester. Donate food and supplies to protester. Holds BMO and TD bank accounts and a joint account to operate farming business. They were frozen. Missed mortgage payments and truck payments. Also arrested. His gloves were removed in the freezing cold weather. He suffered hand injuries. His truck keys were seized. He had no means of transportation. And he was dropped off, deported on the outskirts of Ottawa. Then we have Peter and Nancy, husband and wife. Only Peter was in Ottawa. From Bright, only Peter made cash donations. TD, Canadian Tire, MasterCard were frozen. The wife, Nancy, tried to use the card while shopping, and they were frozen. Imagine that, you're just enjoying your freedom. You're going shopping, it's a lovely day. You go to pay and it doesn't work and you don't know why. It's a horrible feeling. Then we have Richard and Carrie Ann. Hello. Husband and wife from Oakland, no donations, simply TD accounts frozen. TD jointly held with Richard's parents. Richard tried to make an e-transfer and saw his account stated zero balance. TD simply did not tell Richard what he called that the accounts were frozen because of the EA. And I'm telling you all these stories so you see there's not really an established pattern. Some people donated, some people didn't. Some people were in Ottawa, some people weren't. Some people were in the news, some people weren't. It was just, but they all had their bank accounts frozen and their family was affected. Then we have the Yonker Trucking. Commercial vehicle operation license to operate the transport trucks was canceled. Business accounts with National Bank frozen. We have Eddie, who just said from Shediac, New Brunswick, veteran who was in Ottawa. Scotiabank accounts and credit card frozen. Accounts remained frozen despite having left protest. Right? So they only were unfrozen when the Emergencies Act was revoked. But that wasn't for everyone. Some people's bank accounts were still frozen beyond the time of the revocation of the Emergencies Act. Then we have Sean from Winnipeg, Manitoba, was in Ottawa, self-employed as an addictions coach, made direct donations to protesters by cash or e-transfer, and as banks with the Cinnabon Credit Union, and that was frozen. The accounts in his case were never unfrozen, and they were actually canceled in April, so he was debanked. He missed mortgage payments, bill payments, and child support payments. So we're looking at innocent children here who are impacted. So when we look at most of these decisions where it's like, well, you know, there wasn't a breach of the Canadian Bill of Rights because it was short term. It was all very short term and had no significant impact. It was a little kid out there that missed out on the child support payments, which is important for subsistence. So it was far-reaching and long-lasting impact. Then we have Eric from Rosendale, Manitoba, was in Ottawa, self-employed as a grain farmer, no donations made. His Stride bank accounts, checking, savings, credit line, and credit card held jointly with business partner and wife. Frozen. Stride called Eric to tell him accounts frozen due to emergency acts. Some of the banks were telling the people that their bank accounts were frozen, or some people would get calls from RCMP. TD though, TD didn't tell anybody. They didn't, even when you called them to ask, they just didn't tell anybody what was going on. And actually, one of the plaintiffs said that TD said, oh, we're a government-run bank. TD was probably the biggest culprit in all of this. I can say, though, by the way, that Bow Valley Credit Union from Alberta was the only financial institution that didn't freeze anybody's bank accounts. Andrew Fay from Lethbridge, Alberta, was not in Ottawa, donated Give, Send, Go, and GoFundMe. He's an environmental protections officer. TD bank accounts were frozen. Refused to provide any. Imagine that. He's an environmental officer. He's sitting there, you know, in Lethbridge. He donates a bit of money. Next thing you know, his money's gone. Then we have Wayne. He's from McNamee, New Brunswick. He's a member of the, and I'm going to try to pronounce this probably, Esegano Weapon. Check. First Nation. So he's an Indigenous man. He was in Ottawa. He's a contractor. He banks National Bank, and they were all accounts were frozen. His property was also damaged by police officers. He was in his motorhome, and they smashed the window and threw in a can of tear gas. And they grabbed him, took him out, and threw him violently to the ground. Then we have Kathleen from Grand Forks. So this is an interesting one. She's the mother of another plaintiff, Timothy. She was not in Ottawa. She did not donate to the protest, and she's actually against the protest. She banks Grand Forks Credit Union, and that was frozen. And she feels like she was targeted because her ex-common law husband, Sean Thiessen, was part of the British Columbia protest. So she's living paycheck to paycheck. And her accounts were frozen for up to 10 days and had to rely on cash from friends. This is somebody that wasn't involved, no donations against the protest. And her son also wasn't in Ottawa, didn't donate to the protest. He's a cook, he was 17 at the time, and he couldn't cash his paycheck. Imagine that. This is him starting his life in Canada, right? He's a teenager, he's working, and he tries to cash his check, and he can't because his bank says no, because it's frozen, because the government made an executive order to freeze his account.
Why?
Exactly. Why? Because we're living in a country that is no longer a true democracy.
That's right.
Then we have Nicola and Ariel, right? So husband and wife from Strathmore, Alberta. Nicola's a plumber. They were not in Ottawa, but they did donate to the GoFundMe, and their RBC bank accounts were frozen for 10 to 12 days. That's probably the longest run of the freezing. Missed mortgage and car insurance payments, and Nicola could not even attend job sites because he didn't have money to fuel his transportation. Right, so I'm just going to ask a time check because I'm about to move over to an entirely different topic. Does that mean I got 3 minutes?
33 minutes.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. Great. Well, so there's certainly what was an issue, and it's still for me a bone that I pick, with regards to the protests, the level of violence used by the police officers and the RCMP in Ottawa in the so-called red zone, whatever that red zone is. I call that red zone the human rights or the charter rights free zone because there were grave breaches of human rights and charter rights breaches that were conducted. And I remember asking the question to one of the police officers involved in the management of this whole Operation Takedown. I said, I noticed your one plan states respect the charter, and then the second one, the actual, tactical boots on the ground plan, has nothing about respecting the charter. He goes, oh yeah, well, we handed out these little stickers to everyone, charter rights stickers. Okay. All right, well, did any of you get any of those stickers? Right, and who knows what that briefing was? What was that briefing? I mean, there was just almost 2,000 fresh officers coming in to Ottawa, and they all have different ways of communicating, different chains of command, and they were all brought in. I do want to have some empathy, okay, and compassion for some of those officers, boots on the ground, because they're wearing these gas masks. There was like some sort of, there's a bit of a CBRN protocol in some of the plans, and they don't know what they're doing. They're standing there, and they might have been told that the protesters have weapons. I mean, there was some talk at POEC about a van with some weapons in it, and so who knows what the briefing was, right? What I take issue with, and where we should all take issue with, because that's where the problem really lies, is with the executive leadership of the police forces. It's not just the Ottawa Police Service, RCMP and other services as well, where we have political control of our operational police force. Our police forces are no longer independent from government influence. So the people who are the boots on the ground, we need to look at their situation and exercise a bit of compassion and understanding of what they're going through, the bullying that they're experiencing. Because the police officers that do stand up, that say that there's something wrong at the top, they often get laid with disciplinary charges. Like, disciplinary charges has become a mechanism of bullying or getting rid of any police officer that calls out wrongdoing at the top, at the executive level. So some of you might be aware that I'm the lawyer representing Detective Helen Cruz. And last week the decision came out, so I did want to spend the last bit of my presentation talking about the decision because it impacts the whole concept of rule of law here in Canada, which is decaying. Right? I do want to keep a hopeful mindset that we still do have some rule of law, we do still have respect for human rights to some degree, we do have democracy to some degree, right? We can all sit in this room and we don't have to worry about bombs going off. I've lived in Afghanistan. I can go out and wear whatever I want to wear. I can kind of more or less, I can stand here freely and speak freely and not have to worry about my personal safety when I leave this room. So we need to cling on to that, and we need to tell the government at all levels, municipal, provincial, federal, that these are our human rights and we're not going to stop fighting for them until they're fully respected and until our grievances for what happened in 2022 are properly heard, because they have not been heard. Just turning to this decision, I wanted to just state that there was quite a few procedural irregularities in the decision. The hearing officer says he excludes evidence, but he doesn't tell us what that irrelevant evidence is. And then he includes irrelevant and prejudicial information. He includes information that's not even evidence of the record. He put an entire section on personal interests. And that was information that wasn't put to Detective Helen Cruz during cross-examination. I feel at times that he copy and pasted from the prosecutor's closing submissions and put that into his decision. Interestingly, he states twice that Detective Cruz's evidence is exculpatory. So that means that, you know, she's innocent. But then he goes to conclude that she's guilty. States that disciplinary proceedings are internal labor relations matters. The case law says that they're in nature like that, and that's only because police officers were getting confused with running their disciplinary proceedings like a criminal proceeding, right? Because that's what they do, right, for a living, is the criminal proceedings. And so there was case law just to say, well, this is more like an internal labor relations in nature. But nowhere did it say that it was fully an internal relations, because I know this is kind of getting academic, but it's really important that police disciplinary proceedings are seen as regulatory offenses. Regulatory offenses because they're public-facing people, so they have a professional standard and duty, like myself as a lawyer, to the public, right? So he chooses to go with this strictly internal labor relations, and yet he uses the test of what would the community think of, what's the community, the public think about Detective Helen Cruz, what she did, was it reasonable? Well, that speaks to more of a regulatory offense framework. And he says that he doesn't agree with the regulatory offense framework, and then to justify saying she has no right to any defenses, which is a terrible decision to all police officers across the country. This decision basically says, when you're a police officer and you stand up against executive leadership for failing to protect the public, you will be disciplined. And when you're disciplined, you're guilty as charged. You have no right to a defense. I think that's tragic. If you remember, police officers are critical to public safety. They're more important, in my view, than the military. They're the ones who enforce the rule of law in this country. They're the reason why myself, as a woman, can walk on the street and feel safe. It's not a perfect system, but without them, it's awful, it's terrible. And so we need to really be deeply concerned about what's happening to our police officers across the country. Helen's case is one case, but there are others too that are telling a similar story. So other procedural irregularities is that it just wrongfully adopts the prosecutor's closing submissions. And I don't know if any of you watch a closing submission, but the prosecutor suddenly came up with this new theory of the case that Helen had done all this research from 2020 with regards to COVID mandates and and internal police policies with regard to COVID-19, and that influenced her decision to try to find a link between the vaccines and the sudden infant deaths, and that's not what happened. None of that is evidence on the record. Detective Helen Bruce said on the record that, and she was very consistent, that her unit told her there was a doubling to tripling of sudden infant deaths between 2021 and 2022. So she started to probe and look into what were the reasons. And so on January 13th of 2022, she does a little search just to see if it was maybe all smothering, or it was, you know, if there was some kind of pattern or trend. And what she saw was alarming, that a baby girl in December of 2021 had died in mother's arms with an enlarged heart, and then less than a month later, another little baby dies, also in mother's arms. That's highly unusual, does not happen. And I can tell you, having read through all the evidence and the clinical data, that at least 5 babies in the 9 months between May 2021 and May 2021 was when the government said that the vaccine, Pfizer vaccine, was safe for pregnant and breastfeeding women, okay? So they rolled it out. So between May 2021 and beginning of January 2022, 5 babies certainly did die in circumstances identical to those listed in the Pfizer clinical data. It doesn't take a medical expert, a lawyer, or anyone special with special analytical skills to understand that there's a problem with the Pfizer vaccines, and they may be problematic to pregnant and breastfeeding women, that they might be causing these babies' deaths. And therefore, we should start asking questions. And if the government said they were safe, well, then we need to look at criminal responsibility, because I'm pretty sure that that meets the definition of criminal negligence causing bodily harm or causing death in our criminal code. We all need to So, again, like, he sums up her evidence by saying the totality of Detective Drew's evidence is that she was acting within her police powers to help save babies' lives. So he recognizes that that's at the forefront of her mind. But he says police powers, and I said this is not a police powers case. This is a police discretion case. Because discretion is wide, and you could say, well, the beginning of the powers is police discretion. Police powers really actually means when you start to interfere with the liberty of a person by arresting them, for example, or doing or a search warrant. She was not even close to that stage, right? She hadn't made any connections between COVID-19 vaccinations and these babies' deaths. She was just noticing an alarming doubling to tripling and the circumstances of death. So there's a whole lot. I invite you to read this decision because there's a whole lot on personal interest. She wasn't charged with investigating for personal reasons, and yet she's found guilty for investigating for personal reasons. That's wrong. And it's not even just wrong, it's really terrible and difficult to read this, because she also wasn't charged for investigating public officials, and it was no evidence was presented on that. And it was only in the closing submission where the prosecutor said, oh yeah, well, she needed permission if she was going to be investigating public officials. Well, first of all, that's not true. And second of all, that sends a message to all Canadians that public officials are quite frankly above the law. So I just want to say some closing remarks about police discretion. And I'm going to read this out and then explain why this is so important. This decision basically tells police officers that they have limits to their police discretion. That's not true. The hearing officer actually did not refer to the OPS policy where it states that there's no limits to police discretion. So he says, I agree that there needs to be a substantial amount of investigative autonomy and discretionary powers provided to criminal investigators, but not without checks and balances, and certainly not without limits. And then he quotes a Supreme Court of Canada case, the Crown and Beaudry. And he says, well, that case reaffirms that discretion is an essential feature of the criminal justice system. However, follows with the statement that discretion is not absolute. Police officers must justify their use of discretion subjectively and exercise it honestly and transparently. So I had to look at this case, okay? It's very interesting because it says exactly the opposite. So anyways, but before we move on to that, he concludes, that the evidence of Detective Bruce was that she self-initiated criminal negligence investigation, which she hadn't, into the actions of public officials. No, she hadn't. She doesn't know what she was doing. There's no evidence in the record to say that. And also, he accuses her of concealing what she was doing. I mean, she did raise it at the town hall on January 13th in her ad hoc chain of command. Some really strong accusations, actually, in this decision. And also, as you may recall, she was ostracized and bullied by her colleagues because of her September 9th email of 2021, raising concerns of how her fellow officers were suffering injuries from the COVID-19 vaccinations. And in this decision, and is not related to the charge, in this decision, the hearing officer says, well, I'm reading between the lines. He basically said, well, she deserved it. And and I'm saying that as a paraphrasing. But I invite you to read that, and his ultimate conclusion basically is that a reasonable person would understand the community's collective response of concern should they have learned that such an unauthorized criminal negligence inquiries of public officials were being undertaken by a criminal investigator without SACA. The public would expect their police service to exercise proper and effective oversight and authority over their employees to ensure a bias-free approach when conducting criminal investigations. Well, when we look at the Crown and Beaudry, which is the case he quoted and relied on to limit police discretion, this case says, well, this is the Supreme Court of Canada, right? It says, in discharging their respective duties, both the police officer and the prosecutor have a discretion that must be exercised independently of any outside influence. Right? Okay, I'm getting the sign that I am wrapping up here. And it also states, as you see, the police have a particular role to play in the criminal justice system, one that was initially found in the common law, and that they remain independent of the executive branch. If the hearing officer had followed his case that he quoted, he would have found Detective Helen Bruce not guilty. And he wouldn't have written all this other verbiage that said that she's not allowed to do criminal investigation without authorization. That's not what this case says. This case says, hang on, police officers need their discretion to investigate anyone. And it has to be exercised independently of executive. And this bit's interesting here because the court recognized, so this case here, the Beaudry case, and I'll just take 2 minutes, the Beaudry case is interesting because it's a police officer who's been criminally charged with obstructing justice. And it's because he uses police discretion, he failed to not gather evidence against a peace officer, right? So there's, because of preferential treatment, which led him to not conduct an investigation, he was charged with obstruction of justice, okay? So we've got Detective Helen Bruce here, who's looking at baby deaths and very concerned about public safety. She's operating within the Police Service Act, the then Police Service Act, and she's using her police discretion within the act to protect the public. There's no neglect of duty there, right? So, because the misconduct normally has to do with negligence, failure of the police officer to investigate and to protect the public. So here, this court said that in a criminal context, that an accused who acted in good faith but whose conduct cannot be characterized as legitimate exercise of discretion still has not committed the criminal offense of obstructing justice. So if the hearing officer had followed this case, he would have also found Helen not guilty. Because if he believes she didn't use her discretion properly, she's still not guilty. Now finally, this is my favorite part of this decision, that the hearing officer relies on to find Detective Helen Bruce guilty. This is how upside down it is. Paragraph 51, it would therefore be paradoxical to say that conduct that tends to defeat the course of justice can at the same time be justified as an exercise of police discretion. What this is saying is that if you do not exercise your police discretion to protect the public, that amounts to an obstruction of justice.
Sure.
So, not only should the hearing officer find Detective Helen Cruz not guilty if he was following this case that he quoted, he should probably have a little line in there that states, well, you know what, the charge itself is an obstruction of justice because it's preventing Detective Helen Cruz from probing into a public safety issue. That's all I have to say.
It's a small number, but a very powerful number of lawyers who are doing what Bathsheba is doing and going into those courts and taking on those giants. So thank you, Bathsheba. Okay, last but not least, now that I have them in the right order, I'm going to introduce Vincent. Vincent is a veteran police officer, 32 years with the OPP. And then he also is a former member of the Greater Toronto Regional Emergency Response Team and a forensic reconstruction expert. Now that's all past tense, right? You don't do any of this anymore. Because when I read it, it was as if you do it now, and I just wanted to clarify. Okay, well, it didn't take long for the government abuse to start, way back in 2020, 2021. And along with their overreaching mandates that started to take place, and Vincent was prompted to act. After attending the Adamson barbecue takedown in Toronto and assisting the Aylmer Church of God, he began speaking publicly on the issue. This resulted in arrest warrants being issued and charges under the Reopening Act of Ontario. Do you remember that Reopening Act of Ontario, that nonsense? It kept changing. It's part of the plan to keep us confused. Well, Vincent also attended the Freedom Convoy in February 2022, and from what I understand, Vincent and Eddie were largely responsible for making sure that it stayed peaceful, and I think the world knows that it did. Well, as a result of being up there, his bank accounts and credit cards were also frozen. Again, that's why we're here. Fun. Well, he recently launched a podcast also. It's brand new. I think they've done 3 episodes, so you want to check this out. He's done it with Donald Best, another former police officer. It's called Deprived Justice, and you can find that on Rumble. Vincent resides in Niagara, so he had a little bit of a shorter drive here than Eddie. And I'm thankful that his lovely wife decided to share him with us tonight. So please welcome Vincent.
This goes high enough. High enough, yeah, that's good.
Thank you so much, Giselle and Jack, for hosting this event. We couldn't have done it without you. You know, we can't take on legal challenges like this without an effective legal team. And I was introduced to Loberg Ector, Bathsheba, Vandenberg, when we were originally being cross-examined by the Attorney General's office on the Judicial review, which resulted in the Mosley decision. And I can say that this legal team is tough, courageous, intelligent, tenacious, and most of all, they are spiritually connected to this fight. They have been very effective, and they have our trust. So I thank them from the bottom of my heart. Now, this legal battle that we're facing is not a fishing expedition. We're not casting out to see what we can get. This is a hunting trip. We have them in our sights. We know where they are, we know who they are, and we have the evidence. We have very good evidence. And as time went on, since the beginning of this escapade, and the information came out, and the Mosley decision came out, and the decision came out that we are going to push back to restore justice on this issue, we know who we're going after, we know what we have, and our legal team is putting it all together. They're doing it very effectively, they're doing it very efficiently, and they're putting in quite a bit of their own time into this endeavor. But this endeavor is expensive, and the number of defendants that we're going after is about 30, and let's just call that the bandwidth. The bandwidth in how many defendants we're going after takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of reporting, collation of data to put it all together, and it takes time. And the expenses are there, and it's something that Canadians either get behind us on this and continue to support us in this initiative, and that's going to determine just how much bandwidth we can take on in this fight. Without the funds necessary, and we are paying our bills, and we are getting through this, but it is an expensive venture, and we are very thankful and supportive of those Canadians who have come forward and are donating to this cause, but we're just reaching out to a broader audience to inform, as we've done tonight, on just what's at stake here, and and the fact that the financial assistance is always appreciated. So there are some documents that have gone around. I think they're on all the seats that show the different methods that you can use for making contributions, because people have always asked us, how can I help? So these are some of the different ways you can help. Now, I'm going to say over the last 5 years, this has been a tremendous learning experience to all of us. We're living in a world of multiple realities. There's the television version of what's real, and then there's the critical thinking skills of, that doesn't add up, I'm not buying that BS. I don't believe it. The evidence is not there. The data is not there. And this is what's causing a tremendous amount of confusion. I have to say that what has helped me get through this fight, from being arrested, having warrants issued for me because I was standing on a park bench talking to people outside about the importance of their charter rights, to having my bank accounts frozen. Having been in law enforcement for 32 years, police officers are guided by all the legal principles that you are guided by, the criminal code, all the statutes, regulations, and provincial law. But they also have to abide by the Police Service Act. And that's a whole separate book that says, these are all the things you can't do, and these are all the things you should do. So you're always walking that tightrope. And I have to say that what I have discovered is, as I've gone through life, I understand the consequences of doing the wrong thing. And I think most people here understand that. You do the wrong thing, there are consequences. And when the legal entities get involved, those consequences don't look good. It's going to cost you a lot of money, or it's going to cost you some time in jail. I'm not too worried about that. I try to always do the right thing, and I think everybody here does. But what happens What happens when there's consequences, negative consequences, to doing the right thing? What happens when our version of reality, our knowledge, our understanding of our rights and freedoms is violated? Violated by our government and enforced by law enforcement? I mean, for my 32 years of policing, I ensured that I wasn't violating people's rights because I knew what they were. And it's something we didn't violate. And it's something that was very strongly upheld. On occasion, I was found to having violated somebody's rights. Somebody who was intoxicated, driving a vehicle, that I arrested and brought back to the station for breathalyzer tests, and then charged because their readings were so high, and took them to court, only to find out that during the trial, I couldn't account for a 7-minute period right in the middle of that. Hadn't made a note of what happened between this and that. And the judge would rule that that's an unreasonable delay, and that was a violation of somebody's rights. And because of that, they would get off. And I would learn from that and say, I guess if I can't account for every minute, I guess I better do that. I guess I better make sure that I don't make that mistake again. Because it's a mistake in policing, but apparently the judge deems that a violation of your rights. Rights. We have rights in Canada. Mark my word. Until 2020. And then, when I discovered, and you discovered, that there's a switch, and you can turn it off. You can just shut it off. And even though the Constitution says, must be demonstrably justified, the government didn't. And they said, because we said so. And then you didn't have those rights. And the wake-up call to the Detective Helen Bruce issue, the protest in Ottawa, the convoy, and a myriad of other things that we've experienced, told us that they just say they don't have to. They don't have to explain. Because you should know, it was in the CBC. It was in Global News. We're all saying the same thing. We just know that. We don't have to explain it. So then we understand that when that switch goes off and maybe back on, that's not a right. That's a privilege. And then you realize we don't have rights. We just have privileges. They can be turned off and on. There's no explanation. So the only recourse we have is we've tried the criminal route. We've tried producing information to the police services. And when we have seen, witnessed what we've witnessed over the last 4 years or so, it's so disturbing. But what was uplifting, because I had already given up on our justice system, was the Mosley decision. How is it that we won this? We rejoice. We won it by some liberal appointed judge who's a wealthy Laurentian who listened to the evidence, actually listened to the evidence, accepted the evidence, and rendered the decision that was rendered, which was a logical choice because it followed the evidence. And no doubt the Crown appealed that immediately, the government appealed it before they even had time to read it. So that's understandable, that's their position. Now the appeal has happened a few months ago. And from the observations I've made on that appeal, just from the body language of the 3 judges listening to this, and from the evidence presented, I'm highly confident that we are going to win this appeal. Very highly confident. And then it'll probably go higher. But that appeal, regardless of that decision, the Emergency Measures Act says right in it, pursuant to the Canadian Charter of Rights. And the freezing of people's bank accounts without any judicial process is unlawful. And that component was a decision that Justice Mosley made, saying, yeah, that was unlawful. And clearly, the 3 justices that heard the appeal were not happy about it either. So we're awaiting that decision. But our civil suit in going after 30 defendants is not hinging on that decision. That decision will take us from, in the end, from an inconvenience of not having your funds for a period of time to a huge violation of rights. And so we're excited about that. We're excited about that decision. We're excited about moving in that decision. And we're highly confident. But we need the support. We really need the support. And our process moving forward over time is determined by the amount of support we're going to get. So if Canadians are interested in supporting this, I'm convinced we will be successful. Now, you probably think the world's going crazy. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on out there. I remember the first speech that I gave publicly in downtown Toronto, a week after the Adamson's barbecue event, after we all thought the world is going crazy. And I remember having to tell people in my speech, I think there was 8,000 people in this courtyard downtown Toronto. It was the biggest protest they had been up to that time. I tried to give them some confidence and some understanding that this is going to go on for a few years, and you need to be mentally prepared for this. And that you are not going crazy. This is real. What you understand, that's why you're here, your understanding of this is every bit as real as reality. It is reality. Because a lot of people would think, I would wake up in the morning and think, I'm going crazy. Am I dreaming? Is this real, right? We all had that kind of feeling? Right. So, the point I want to leave you with, before I finish up, is that what got me through this is not having hundreds of friends. I lost friends. I lost family. I lost a lot of relations. And I know you did too. But I made other ones. And there are people in this room that I met, that I know, that I love. And the reason I love them is not because of their vaccination status. I've learned not to make that my dividing line. We can disagree, but can we have mature conversation? The people that I adhere to and with, do you have my back? Because I have yours. And I can have a disagreement with someone who made a different choice, but I know they're there for me. I know they have my back. And that's who I need to hang with. In our communities, in our families, in our friendship circles. That's the importance. And I'm so happy to see certain people here that I haven't seen for a while. That are my family. Even though we've had little contact, I know they have my back. I know you have my back, Ryan.
Always.
I know that when I was struggling in the midst of this, and I needed a video put together, and I know nothing about video, but it has to be done right. And I drive out to London, and I meet a guy who I've never met before, and he drops what he's doing, and bam, 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 he makes it happen. Because it's important. I know he has my back. I know other people have my back spiritually. And I have a lot of people in this room that are that way. So it's not about the rest of the world. Focus on your own circle. Focus on those people that you know have your back and that you'll have their back. It's not about the It's not about the quantity, it's about the quality. Right? So I thank you all for coming here. I ask that you take this information and you become the ambassador. You become the voice. You pass on this message of what happened here, what happened in this situation, what happened in the Helen Grew situation, and continue this, because we are a dying breed. And on that timeline continuum, we're only here for a limited time. So I ask you to do your part if you can, however you can. Support us however you can. And I thank you.
Vincent made that really hot. Okay, I hadn't allowed time for questions, but I think we are about 15 minutes ahead of schedule. So if everybody is okay, we'll maybe take 2 or 3 or 4 questions, and then I've just got a few closing words. Lady in the, raise your hand first. Is that okay? I didn't even ask you.
Thank you, everybody, for all your amazing work. I just want to be really clear on this. So what you're saying is that there's not a whole lot of case law that's taken place thus far, and that this particular case is absolutely going to be precedented, and it's going to potentially get the ball rolling for other case law to take place, and that this is really, really, really important. Is that correct?
Really, really, really important. Yes, it is. So to sum up on what she had said, the part that I left out that really answers this is, you know, people in society do go a little crazy. Humans' natural go-to is the animal kingdom. You know, we can become wild. As humans, left unbridled, society can really come apart. And so there are guide rails that are put in place to keep humanity true, right? And I guess the best way I could sum that up is the rule of law. In that our law, since about the 1500s or earlier, since the creation of Magna Carta, is that really we want to say that, you know, the law has to be fair, you have to be considered innocent until proven guilty, and that the law in Canada applies equally to everybody. That's not happening anymore. So the rule of law is falling apart completely. It just derailing. So this court case is an example of putting a guide rail back up and making it very clear that that was wrong, that was unlawful, and that the government needs to be held accountable for that. Yes, absolutely.
I just want to add to that is that in Canada, it's important to still believe in the rule of law and to take matters to court. This is really the last pillar of fighting against fascism. Yeah. And I do actually have a lot more ordinary Canadians approaching me to help them sue government to hold them account. The rule of law also is about holding the government to account and telling them that the rule of law exists for all, that they are not above the rule of law. And so that's why the fight is far from over. This is going to take a long time. In international criminal law, sometimes it takes 20, 30 years. I don't think it's going to take that long here, but we really do need to remain resilient, and as Vince was saying, is build strong, resilient communities, know who your friends are, and help each other out. Support doesn't always have to be financial. I'm not soliciting for funds, by the way. I'm a lawyer, I'm not allowed to do that. Support can be a hug, can be a conversation. I have people supporting me by sometimes just lending me their time and ear, right? So keep on fighting. You're not alone. There's a lot of Canadians across across this country that are stepping up to hold their municipal governments to account, provincial and federal. We will win in the end. Helen's case was a not guilty, I mean rather guilty, I want to be good and not guilty. It was a guilty at the first instance, but it was a tribunal level. We're appealing to another level, which again is going to be a tribunal level, but it will perhaps see its day in court one day. I'm hoping that the verdict will be overturned at the next tribunal, but if it's not, it will be in the court. And again, I don't know how to convey this message properly, but this is the thing, is that when you're living in a country that says it's a democracy, but it's not, the only way to uncover the truth is to fight it and put it in the courts. It's recording the history, so although we have guilty charges in the first instance of public mischief, they will be appealed, okay? We'll get up, higher up, and we will win in the end.
When you appeal a case, the appeal judges have to pick a rule of law that wasn't followed in Mosley's case. What is the rule of law that the defendants are saying that Mosley did not follow?
Well, we talk about rule of law as an important principle, but it's not something that was argued at this case, in this case, right? So it was
Isn't that part of the appeal?
Well, the rule of law ultimately is respect for human rights and government accountability in a nutshell. That's how I see rule of law. Canada has a different definition than the international law definition, but they mostly found that the invocation of the Emergencies Act was not reasonable and that it was illegal. Right, so that is upholding principles of the rule of law. He found that sections 2, freedom of expression, and section 8 were breached. So the freezing of the bank accounts was found to be contrary to our charter rights. So in finding that charter rights had been breached, that's how Mosley's upholding the rule of law, right?
Yeah.
Does that help to answer the question?
Yeah, and the second part is with Helen Drew's case. I mean, the language is clear that a little poetic license on the judgment, which to me says interference, which you can never prove a judge was interfered with in his judgment.
That's right.
So, you know, I don't think until there's a change in the political environment here, I don't think the chances are going to be great, because there's always going to be influence on these judges.
So that's where I would disagree with you. And this is where I find it interesting and sometimes unfortunate with us Canadians, is that we have lost our sense of agency. We have to start empowering ourselves and supporting each other and not giving up the fight. Freedom is not won by sitting on a chair and doing nothing. Freedom is won by...
I'm just curious if anyone here knows how much the cops got for the cleanup crew in Ottawa in February, because I do. I had it out with one of them the year after. Do you know how much they got paid for an 8-day contract, the low-level guys that we saw on that camera? I'd like everyone to know this. It's important. Everybody should take this and spread it around. Are you aware of them? Do you know? Anybody know how much they made? $40,000 for 8 days. The lower-level guys. One of them was a Toronto police cop, the guy that I met and confronted at a group campground. I was told he was going to be there, and I knew. So I was looking for him, played it coy, and had a one-on-one conversation with him, and I ruined this guy nicely. He put his tail between his legs, but he quit the force like 3-4 months after. So what you said about feeling sorry for them, I can't feel sorry for them. Maybe they had a choice to go there and they made big bucks, but he's got a conscience now, and he's now the head of Hamilton bylaw enforcement. The pensions were the same. He was really happy, but why did he leave 3 months after being so proud to go to Ottawa as part of that cleanup crew and make his $40,000? Anyways.
So thank you for that. I do want to say that I didn't say that I feel sorry for anybody. Pity is a terrible thing. But to be compassionate, and it's very hard to be compassionate, but it's important because we do find the truth in compassion. It doesn't mean not holding them to account, by the way.
Gotcha, okay, cool, now we're
Okay.
good. 40 grand.
Okay, we'll take one more question.
Charging them or bringing charges against them? I thought they had passed laws that we could not press charges against them for the things that they had done or held them accountable.
I'm not really sure what the question is, but we're trying to keep questions relative to this issue, not like some side issue.
No, but I just thought that what you're trying to do is, are we not trying to sue the Prime Minister for the things that he has done?
Yes, there's
But I-
30 defendants and the Prime Minister is one of them, yes.
Yeah, I was under the impression that they had put in place laws that they could not be charged for things that they have done.
Well, these are not charges. This is a civil suit. There are two different things. This is not a criminal charge, it's a civil proceeding. Yeah. One last question, go ahead.
I'd like to make a point here. If they could take your bank account, I think it's a little bit intelligent for us to all to get a food storage and learn to garden. The bottom line is you need to know how to feed yourself. And if they take your bank account, at least you can live by eating.
Okay.
Yeah, can somebody, if somebody has another question, can you phrase it as a question? Because otherwise people are
I
just
have a question. Do
making.
you have a financial platform to help donate to bring this to the highest level?
A financial platform?
Yeah.
Well, we do have a Give Send Go is a website where you can, there are a couple options there where people can.
What about events, maybe, like, I was thinking fundraising events, some of the bits where I've done some things for myself, big crowds, whatever.
Yeah, so this is a fundraising
Yeah,
event.
I didn't
If
know that.
you want to run or create another fundraising event, you can certainly reach out to us. We'd like to come to the event. We'd like to speak at the event and answer questions. But anybody who would like to host an event, that would be greatly appreciated, sure.
One more question. Marcus, you're up.
Okay, go ahead.
I see what's up there, and I really appreciate the boldness and courage it takes, because you guys put yourself at risk for this. I really see it. What I see up there is corruption at a really high level. Whether it's a federally appointed judge, it's patronage appointments. How do we go after that stuff? Because they're loyal to their brand.
Civil litigation is a very expensive area of law, and as I was saying earlier, I'm having more Canadians approach me for injunctions, for example, when the municipality doesn't listen to them, doesn't respect and comply with the own bylaws that they created. All right, that's how you tackle it, is that you name it. You have to give it a name, and you give it a name by bringing it to court. I think there was a lady there, if it's okay as a final question.
I just wanted to ask if all the evidence of everyone's stories of having their bank accounts frozen was actually given to the judge. Because Tom Marazzo, for example, his son is ill. He didn't have cash in his pocket. He couldn't buy his son medicine right after the Freeland convoy. I mean, the judge needs to realize how really serious that is. So was all the evidence given to him? Because he seems to have fluffed it off.
Right, that's an excellent question, and that's a point that I was alluding to. So, I mean, every case is limited to the evidence that's before them. So the judicial review had Vincent Eddy as their affidavit evidence, and we did include the psychological impact, you know, the looking over your shoulder effect after having your bank accounts frozen. And that, unfortunately, was not weighed or seen as an actual issue or harmful impact. Okay, so now with the civil litigation, we have 20 plaintiffs, and that's another different pool of evidence available in that lawsuit. I appreciate Mr. Marazzo's circumstances. They were when he testified at POEC. But what I have noticed, and I agree with you, is that people don't seem to understand or appreciate how devastating it is to have your bank account frozen. And that's why it's each one of our jobs and role to share these stories with more people so that they understand what it actually means. Because when the public speaks, they will be heard eventually. I do believe in the power of our voices being heard eventually at some point. I mean, they are, our stories are being spread, actually.
Because there's another part to that story. How many were able to get any financial instrument at another bank? Like, are they stuck with the bank that they're at, and now they're not able to do, like, has that happened to certain individuals that maybe?
Well, I did mention that a lot of people actually joined Bow Valley Credit Union of Alberta, of course, it's for residents of Alberta, but
There's also Penn Financial in Niagara, never froze any bank accounts. I took the documents in that Vincent gave me, took it into the bank, and the gal there said he would never do that. And
less valuable information to share with people, right? To protect their assets and their freedoms. Thank you.
Thank you for all you do.
Thanks for the questions and thank you for the answers. I didn't want to go past 9 o'clock because I want to be respectful of your evenings. You probably want to get home, get your pajamas on, put your feet up like I do. And I also know that you're getting a lot of appeals all the time for funding, and I realize probably most of those appeals they're legitimate and they're very worthy causes. But I do very humbly ask you to consider supporting this legal action here and these, what I call heroes up here. They're amazing people. There was a flyer on your chair. It tells you all the nice ways that you can donate. Sarah will be at a table just outside these doors, and she can take cash or a check or silver if you walk around with that change in your pockets. She can also write a receipt for you. Now, as I direct you out there, before I do that, I don't want to forget to thank people that helped tonight. We've got Sarah and her husband Scott at the sound. Thank you. Ariel and Hallie who looked after the food. Wasn't finished. Xander, who did those amazing 4 cakes back there. Xander is a culinary student at Fanshawe. And then also Adrian, thank you for doing the video recording. The young ladies at the back packed up the leftover goodies. You guys didn't eat very much. I didn't think I'd have anything left over, but there is lots left over. It's all packed up. You can open the box, see what you like, $10, $20, $30, depending on how fancy you want to go. So please help us clean those up. And lastly, outside the door, Sarah will be out there if you want to give a donation, but there's also going to be a lady out there. I think Bathsheba said something about stepping out there and doing stuff, and I know we've got a couple of candidates or people looking for nominations here. I believe we have Christine Oliver, who's with the United Party of Canada. You need to check it out. She is with London West looking for the nomination. I think we have somebody from the PPC here as well. So we need to support people who are getting up and standing up for our freedom. But when you go out there, just to make sure you stop at that table, there is one other handout. Let me just find it here. It just came out from, it's 5 questions to ask every federal candidate. It's nice and concise. There's not a lot on here, 5 questions to ask them. And I would also encourage you to go to the website on here, politicalscorecards.ca, and you can make this shareable on your social media. You should get some good conversations going with this. Do I have anything else? I think that's it. I forgot to tell you earlier where the washrooms are, so just before you leave, they're out that door at the far end of the hall, and I think that's it. So let's give another round of applause. Thank you again for coming, and have a safe trip home.